table in your
of my mother's bedroom.
And
And
how-
only from the bunker can we open that opening. The opening was made like our parquet. It was beautiful wood parquet, and it was cut out that way. So it was only one person could fit into this hole. And when the night table was on, nobody would know. Even if the night table wouldn't be on, it looked just like the other part of the parquet floor. And they had a ladder put there, so we could go down or up one by one.
the ladder led into a basement.
In the basement. That was the bunker.
And would you describe what
It
the
was
structure was of the
It
basement?
was a stone. The whole house was unfinished stone, and we made it sure. We prepared it for weeks and weeks. We had about 3-4 weeks to prepare. We put in beds, and we put a big table we had there, so everybody can fit around there. And during the day, that's where we were sitting. And the radio. And everybody was able to take just the most necessary thing for downstairs. And I remember my mother had his favorite pillows on the sofa, like decoration. And she just couldn't leave them upstairs. She said it will be nice and will make the place a little bit friendlier. And my mother, I remember the day when we moved, she was occupying herself doing spring cleaning in the apartment, but we were leaving. She had to do something. Everybody was doing something, not to think about tomorrow.
And so now you had, at this point, your parents, yourself and your husband,
the four
the four
uncles and their wife, and two uncles' wives. The other two, they didn't come, they had the small children.
And your child?
And my child, already a week before we went down, came the saddest day of my life. When Mrs. Kratochvil came, usual time to take her for a walk, and I walked them about 10 minutes away from my home, so we can get a taxi there and nobody would see it in our street. Taxi arrived, and Alex that day didn't want to leave me. He just started to cry and scream, and he wouldn't go, like he would feel that that's the day he has to part from his mother, maybe forever. And the taxi came, and I remember, I think about it so many times, especially when I am in a sad day of my life, or a pessimistic day, when I think that they are things I will never have or see again, that I just pushed him into the car and I ran away from him, not even kissing him the last time. And I said to myself, please God, I try to make deals with God that anything should happen to me in my life, just please don't let anything happen to this innocent, beautiful baby. And I gave Mrs. Kratochvil my relative's name and address in Australia and in New York. If anything happens to us, that to make it sure that they will find out where Alex is. So I parted from Alex and I went back. We moved on then short time after we moved down in the bunker.
Did you look at this at the time as the best decision to have made in the
Yes, we all came to that conclusion. That's the only hope, because to take a 10-month-old baby to the bunker, he would surely cry one time or the other, and they wouldn't. My uncle wouldn't even let me bring him down. And my other uncle also had small children, and no baby could come down in the bunker. So
you went back by yourself?
I went by myself, and I cried with my mother and father and my husband, and we just prayed from every night when I went to bed. I prayed that anything should just, I kept on saying, dear God, anything, any punishment, anything you can give, just give me back my baby. Anyway, days started to go very slowly in the bunker. And the highlight was when we listened to the BBC, the radio. It came on the radio. That was illegal too. And if we would have get caught just for that, it would have been punishment, very heavy punishment, just to listen to English radio.
How did you ensure that your presence was so secret that no one could tell that you were hiding in the basement? Were there measures that you took?
Yes, we made up. Every day we got together and we made new regulations. We cannot go, nobody could go up ever to the apartment. The only time if anybody would go up has to ask permission from any of my uncle or my father. They could just, they were like the ruler of the bunker.
And at this point you had about 10 people in the bunker, is that right?
Then it was very soon, by July and August, it was filled up to full capacity.
So how many people?
All together we were 32. And the only time we were able to go and have a bit of fresh air when the sirens started to go on. Then everybody, the neighbors, they ran to the bunkers or shelters, and we could go up when everybody was in the shelter. We came up for a little fresh air. And that was the only time, and my mother in the night went up and cooked for us. And with my other aunt.
Would you do that in a way that no one could tell that there was
nobody else was in the house in the beginning? But in August was one day we heard the Mrs. Svoboda came down and were telling us that 12 German soldiers were put in our house, not in our apartment, but in the where the business section was, and they were roomed there. And of course, we again had to take strict measurement, and my parents, my mother couldn't go up to cook. And we just had to be very, very careful. And the end of September, thank God, they were starting to withdraw from that part of Budapest. And before they left, they said to our savior, Mrs. Svoboda, that we heard that Jewish families around here somewhere. Before we go, surely we're going to catch them. Of course, we were very, very much afraid of that we are that family whom they're talking about. Just they didn't know.
How likely did you think at the time that you would survive?
We didn't think that we'll survive.
You did
We were
not.
hoping that it will be, the war will end soon, and then that's the only way we could. We knew that sooner or later somebody will find us there. We were signs. We couldn't cover it up 100%.
For example?
For example, while my mother went up to cook, nobody was in the house, and suddenly a German soldier walked in who were stationed there, and during the day they were not in the house, but he came back unexpectedly. But Mrs. Svoboda was so smart. She said to him, I want to introduce to my sister-in-law. She just came from the country, and she's staying here with me for a few days. And she introduced my mother, who spoke very well German, and my mother was brave and didn't open up that way. She just said yes, and here for a few days, and when are you leaving, and when did you come, and you liked Budapest, and went into a conversation with him. So things like that, they were was dangerous, and every day more and more danger. So we were sure that sooner or later, if the war doesn't end, we will have to, the end will come. And
were you also thinking in terms of the supplies that you had left, and how long you could survive physically with the supplies?
We had food enough, but we were afraid that the water will be cut off. Anyway, it was October 15th when we woke up, and wonderful news came over the radio, and it said Horthy, our governor, capitulated to the Germans. And, capitulated, and he wrote and he told the Americans, England, to the alliance, that he wants to be friend with them. And so everything will be just perfect. The war will end for Hungary. So the first thing, of course, came to my mind, I have to go and get Alex. So I went to the other part of Budapest, and I went in with happiness. And surprisingly, I saw that her living room, Mrs. Kratochville's living room, was full with neighbors who were crying. And they were very upset that the war had ended, but they lost, the Hungarians lost the war. So Mrs. Kratochville pushed me in the other room where I found my Alex, and I started to get him ready to leave and get him dressed. And Mrs. Kratochville said, maybe you shouldn't take him. It's not sure that it will end. She was a wonderful lady, and she was thinking of that. And while I'm talking, my mother ran after me, and she said, don't bring him yet. Don't bring him. Just let us go back and wait till tomorrow. So we went home, and already in the train going home, the radio played German music. I said, German music? Why playing again? Something was in the air. I felt it's not normal. And by the I went home, and my uncle was dancing with my grandmother and happy, and everybody beautiful. But that radio with the German music disturbed us, and we didn't have to wait, unfortunately, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That arrow had part, arrow cross it was a Nazi Hungarian but came and took over. Szálasi was his name, the man who took over the government, and they gave announcement through the radio that we are fighting till the bitter end. Right away back to the bunker, but we could hear gunshots, and Mrs. Svoboda came down and was telling us that unfortunately they marching the Jews from the ghetto toward the Danube, and lots of thousands of people were shot and thrown that night in the Danube. And of course I couldn't sleep. I was thinking I went the wrong day to pick Alex up, and now everybody will know that he's Jewish, and it's a tragedy will come. But Mrs. Kratov will send me words through Mrs. Svoboda a few days later that Alex is all right, but he's sick. He got a virus, a cold, and she didn't know what to do with him. So we advised her just to take him to a doctor and tell the doctor that to give his a doctor's a physician child and to get medication. And the doctor said to him, this case I'm going to give medication, please don't bring him here anymore. Because he was afraid that he'll get in trouble. So that's when after October 17 it started to be real dangerous and bad, and the siege of Budapest started. And constantly the guns, and it was like the world came to an end. The bunker was shaking, and it wasn't a day when we didn't say goodbye to each other, because we felt that we couldn't live another day. And the food started to be less and less, of course, and then we didn't have water, we didn't have light, we sat in
so
the
you were
darkness.
sitting in a dark basement with no light, and did you have heat?
Then on the end, no heat, because we were afraid to put the fire on. And it was quite circumstances. It
you
was
had
just
sanitary conditions that were
we
reasonable?
Yes, we had toilets, and it was okay.
So you had some facilities, and you also had the lack of electricity,
Yes.
lack of any kind of heat, and it was the winter time.
It was winter time, and it was snow and ice, and it was just terrible. We really didn't think we'll survive. And that time I just begged God that Alex should survive and somehow get him up from Budapest to America, to his aunt.
So you were fairly convinced that you would not see the child again.
That time I was sure I will not see him again.
So we have more to your testimony. Clearly, there was more that happened after this terrible time.
Yes.
Which means that you and all of the people who were hidden in the bunker were not discovered, and you managed to survive underground.
Yes.
So
it went till February.
And then
February, when we really, it was the culmination of the guns and bombs, and one day, but we thought that they are very close, the Russians are close to us, and one day when it was really like hell, suddenly it was silence came over to the city. We couldn't hear a voice, it was hours and hours quiet, and suddenly we heard Russian voices. and screaming. We didn't know what it was, but everybody was screaming upstairs. And
Why were they screaming?
people were screaming. We thought that from happiness, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. And in the bunker among us were two Russian originally, came from Russia, but they were like domestic help, Jewish girls. And when we went down to the bunker, my parents and my grandparents said, we have to take these two orphans down with us. They are part of our family. So these two girls, they were about 18, 19 years old, innocent, religious young girls. And they said, we'll go up and we'll tell the Russians that 32 Jewish people were saved here, and they're going to be so happy. And with this, and they spoke Russian, so it's obvious that we chose them to tell the Russian soldiers that we are done there. They went up, and all we heard was crying and screaming, and we recognized their voices. And my mother was so upset, she wanted to climb after them. They said, how can I live? It will be on my conscience to let them, anything happens to them, I have to go and shelter them. And my husband and my father forced my mother to stay downstairs. And later on, the two girls came down in terrible shock. They were raped by the Russian soldiers. And they said they told us to stay upstairs. They went to sleep. They had some drinks, but we're not going back, of course. So we stayed in the bunker 3 more days till everything cleared up. And we didn't want to meet them anymore. When we went up, all our furniture was chopped, like they used that as heating woods. And we started to, of course, going up to find Alex. We didn't know what happened under the siege. We walked out, my husband and me walked out from the street, and they were part of Budapest street fights. And they stopped us, the bullets stopped us and said, we have to go back. We went back to our house, to our bunker. And it was snow and cold, and a day later we tried again, and we got to Hernád utca 17. That's where Alex was hidden, and we got to the front of the house. It was all bombed down, and I said, my God, where are they? So a man was coming, said, some people are down in the basement, in the shelter. We go down, and there was Alex with an apple in his hand. And so we got him back, and he looked wonderful. The woman took real good care of him. So we started to put together the pieces. I got back my apartment very luckily. And my husband said, I like to go and find my people, my mother. And my husband comes from a family of 8. Was 5 boys and 3 girls. The 9th one, they had another brother who never came back from First World War. And he went to Sziget, but all he could find was nothing. No family was there at all. We later found out, we knew that they were taken away from Sziget. We found out that only a brother and one sister came back. one sister was already in America, so she was safe. So only 3 of them were saved.
So your husband then found
They
out
found out
that he
that
was
nobody was in Sziget anymore. And coming home on the train, met an old friend and said, "Why don't you stay in Satu Mare? It's a fairly big city and they don't have Jewish children, they don't have Jewish doctors, and it will be good, it's closer to Budapest, and stay there." That time Satu Mare became Romanian again. Was changing place all the time. So it's a long story how we got back to Satu Mare, because trains didn't go from Budapest to Satu Mare. I had to stay 3 days in the train, and all we were taking 2 luggages which were full with instruments. That was the only thing we wanted to take with us. And we started to live in Satu Mare, where he got a very nice apartment and 3 state sponsored job. He was the physician for the train section and the convent, and for the Jewish hospital he worked. And he was the only ear, nose and throat doctor in Satu Mare. So we did very well and people liked him. He was an excellent doctor, and wherever he went, he only had to open his medical bag, and he was in business. He was an excellent, excellent surgeon.
so that your next home was in Satu Mare, which is now Romania,
Yes.
and you were living with post-war Romania at that time. And what was that like for you then, to be in a new country?
Well,
new
I liked
situation?
it. I liked it because he was very well respected, and I helped him in the office. I was his secretary, and Alex was the only Jewish child in the whole town of 30,000 population. And people started to come back, Jewish people from the concentration camp. It was always 3-4 relatives who lived with us. We were never alone, always someone, a young niece, a young cousin, an uncle came to stay with us. And the Jewish life started to pick up. Alex was very well liked. You can imagine that the only Jewish child in a town where was full of cheder and Jewish school. And every week we had to attend a wedding, because lots of widows and single women came back from the concentration camp who lost their partners, their husbands. And but life, they found out they have to start new everything, and so they were good times too. But my husband said, "I don't want to stay among the murderers." And
This is November 20th, 1995. Survivor interview with Susan Sreter. Marion Weisberg is the interviewer. This is tape 4. And the interview is taking place in Lawrence, New York, USA, in English. So we're in Satu Mare now.
yes.
But looking forward to the future, and in 1947,
47, we decided to leave Satu Mare and go to America or Australia. And it was hard to get permits and hard to leave Romania. But we succeeded, and 47 November we were already on the boat to Australia, saying goodbye to my parents. My father said he didn't want to be a burden on us, so he just started a new